Now we're shortly going to have our keynote address from a great friend of the World Sustainable Development Summit and one of the most persuasive scholar campaigners on climate change, Professor Jeffrey Sachs, Director of the Center of Sustainable Development at Columbia University in the USA, and much, much more besides. And I'd like to invite Dr. Srivastava to say a few words of introduction.
A very good afternoon to all of you, ladies and gentlemen. It's a real pleasure to be here for what now turns out to be the valedictory session, but this was a session we were supposed to have in the morning on India and the climate crisis. And I'm sure you have heard a lot about it in the last 3 days, but just wanted to add my own two-penny bit to that. I think the fact that India is extremely vulnerable to climate change is something that is well established and the audience here would be very familiar with. And the fact that we can do very much about our own contributions to the emissions of greenhouse gases is also well established, which again, most of you are extremely familiar with. Now, whether India is the third or the fourth largest emitter on greenhouse gases depends on how you look at it, of course, but we are somewhere there, right at the top. And we do have a huge role to play in being able to both mitigate and, of course, a responsibility on the adaptation side. In the previous session, we heard a fair degree about the enabling environment. I think as Mr. Dasgupta mentioned, almost every speaker spoke about the fact that we need to have an enabling environment, and I think in my mind at least there's no doubt that that enabling environment has to be very strong. But I would also like to go a little beyond looking at enabling environment only as a definition of policies and regulations that the corporate sector and others can follow, to also look at how it is that we can improve the performance of our governance institutions themselves. So how do we ensure that the people who are formulating those policies are aware and are themselves, in a sense, incentivized to ensure that those policies that we are defining would result in the outcomes that we are looking for. So if we take a very classic example, if provision of energy to the health sector is going to have a huge developmental impact, but the demand from each of those primary health centers out in rural India is going to be so small that it does not really add value to the people who are implementing the major energy programs that we have. We are not going to get the investments that are required in providing energy for the health sector. So the whole issue of allocation of resources, of the incentives that have to be created to ensure that, as I think was mentioned in the last session as well, the small is not ignored when you're looking at the big, is going to be critically important. We have several other examples where we have seen very ambitious programs that have been announced by the government of India and by various state governments as well, that prove beyond doubt that we are committed to mitigating our emissions of greenhouse gases as also an adaptation. But we are also, I think, aware of the fact, sorely, that not all of these programs result in the outcome that we want. The renewable energy sector is one which has been oft talked about, and we have made huge strides in it. But are those strides as large as they could have been if everything else was right? If the short-term political considerations did not result in a compromise as far as the long-term is concerned. There are a number of other areas in which we can talk about, but we are in the last session of the day, and we have a wonderful speaker who's going to be addressing us via video, I understand, because of some issues with the visa, which he's not able to be with us, Professor Jeffrey Sachs. He actually requires no introduction to this audience. He's been here at the DSDS earlier and WSDS now. for many years, and all of you have possibly heard him in the past. But as has already been said, he is Director of the Center for Sustainable Development at Columbia University, Director of the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network, which has built up enormously in the last few years. He's been advisor to 3 of the United Nations Secretaries Generals and so many other roles that he has played over a period of time, and he has written and published extensively as well. I cannot say that we would hear from Professor Jeffrey Sachs an outsider's view on India in the context of climate crisis, because I think Jeff Sachs, for the amount of time that he has spent here, is almost an insider as far as India is concerned, but still, I think he brings a worldview which is going to be critically important for us, and we look forward to hearing from him.
Thank you very much. And now if we can roll the presentation, the video, please.
Sachs here. I really wish I was with you, but unfortunately I had a visa snafu at the last minute, and so I'm speaking to you from the lounge in Dubai Airport. And greetings to everybody at the World Sustainable Development Summit, one of my favorite venues each year. And thank you so much for the chance to be with you, at least virtually, to share some remarks with you. I very much wanted to be together this year to speak about India's energy challenges. 2019 is a pivotal year. All world leaders will come together at the United Nations in September to reinforce the commitments of the Paris Climate Agreement. We are not on track, as you know, and it is extraordinarily important for India, for India's well-being, for its future economic development, for its public health, that the world makes a decisive turn towards climate safety and decarbonization, and that India also turns to renewable energy and cleans up its air. I'm going to switch to a PowerPoint now, and I hope that you'll follow along as I discuss these issues with you. I want to talk about India and clean energy, technologies, health, and economics. The first point is that we are already at a concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere that is consistent with nearly 1.5 degrees warming relative to the pre-industrial temperature. We're not in equilibrium. There are other forces that affect the climate, but basically we have filled the atmosphere with enough carbon dioxide to already raise temperatures in equilibrium to the limit that was set at Paris. We have to decarbonize as fast as possible. And the alarming truth is that, as recent articles have shown, because of positive feedbacks in the climate system, global warming will happen faster than we think. And further findings, especially on sea level rise, show that global warming will be even more dangerous than we think, possibly leading to many meters of sea level rise, even at current or even slightly higher temperatures than now. The message is clear, and it was conveyed in the recent report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that to keep warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial, even with some limited possibility, we have to decarbonize basically by mid-century. These downward sloping curves show the rapid rate of decarbonization that is absolutely essential for our success. The alarming truth is, of course, that emissions are still rising. We have to ramp up because they are still rising because major economies, including India, China, and other major economies, continue to build more energy capacity that's needed for India, but to build it with coal. And so in the last years, we see increased emissions in China, we're seeing increased emissions in India. But as this graph shows, renewable investments are picking up, and the costs of solar energy and wind energy are plummeting. And so there's basically a reasonable prospect of a dramatic decarbonization of the energy system. But there's also a lot of momentum, inertia, and politics that continues to drive a coal-based economy, even when we have within reach a low-cost, renewable energy-based economy. In India, of course, there is a very rapid expansion of solar energy, and India is a world leader in the effort to invest in solar, but even more could be done. India also has tremendous wind potential, and much more could be done on scaling up wind power. Now, there is another basic reason why India should be shifting to renewable energy along with the rest of the world, and that is that India's air quality is foul. I'm showing you in this slide almost the real-time air quality measures, which you can find online and probably that you check every day. The AQI for India shows alarmingly bad air, day by day, month by month, season by season. And if you look today, especially in northern India, the air varies from unhealthy to absolutely hazardous conditions. A recent study that just appeared shows that the population-weighted particulates, PM2.5, are strongly correlated with population use of solid fuels, of course, and related, of course, to the burning of coal, diesel, and fossil fuels as well. India needs to move to a clean, modern energy system based largely on wind and solar, producing electricity that can be used for cooking, for heating and cooling, for industry, for transport, for appliances, and for other major uses. In other words, electrification of the economy based on clean, renewable energy is the key, both for stopping the disasters of climate change, but also the horrendous air pollution. A study in Lancet Planet Health that just appeared last month says that the impact of air pollution on deaths and disease burden in India can be calculated to cause a loss of more than 2 years of life expectancy in Rajasthan, Uttar Pradesh, and Haryana, and across all of India, an average of 1.6 years lost life expectancy, with about half of that premature death occurring for people under the age of 70. So what is to be done? As the next slide emphasizes, there are 4 basic pillars of decarbonization. The first is grid-connected, zero-carbon electricity, as I've already mentioned, wind power, solar power, hydroelectric power, nuclear energy, carbon capture and storage, ocean current energy, geothermal energy, and some other technologies that will provide perhaps small niche amounts of zero carbon electricity. I emphasize grid connected because that will reduce the needs for expensive storage of zero carbon energy. The second pillar is smart land use, to end deforestation, to restore degraded lands, and to shift diets to plant-based proteins. That's especially needed in other parts of the world, not in India per se. But the benefit of this approach is that we will have more biological storage of carbon. The third pillar of decarbonization is the electrification of transport, buildings, and industry through battery electric vehicles, through power to hydrogen, where zero carbon electricity is used in electrolysis to produce hydrogen, and then hydrogen is combusted, for example, in ocean shipping, or put into hydrogen fuel cells, or turned into synthetic hydrocarbons. This also is sometimes called power to liquids, where the hydrogen is combined with carbon dioxide and through special catalytic processes ends up as hydrocarbon chains, and also similarly power to gas to produce synthetic methane using renewable energy and CO2, and then that methane is burned, for example, to produce dispatchable energy with the gas turbines, and as that synthetic methane is burned, the CO2 is captured, combined with hydrogen from renewable energy, and in a closed loop, in essence, the gas-fired power plant is a zero-emission gas-fired power plant, effectively powered by renewable energy, not, of course, by the methane, which is the fuel carrier. Finally, there is energy efficiency in design, materials, changed behaviors that makes the energy transformation to decarbonization all the cheaper and all the more effective. I think it's important to emphasize bright line rules for the world to get to 100% decarbonization by mid-century. These rules are quite simple and they are quite practical. They are to stop new coal plants, to stop new oil and gas exploration, because we already have enough proved reserves in the world many times over compared to what we can safely use. Stop new fracking, stop new oil and gas pipelines, stop new deforestation. For light-duty vehicles, shift to battery electric vehicles no later than 2030. For investors, divest from greenhouse gas-based companies, industries, and projects. Sue oil companies and pro-carbon governments that are not getting the message. And connect renewables in transmission grids worldwide. Now, India has the means to accomplish 100% renewable energy by 2050. And it's a matter of effort, design, and of course, shifting investments from coal, especially, to 100% renewable systems. I would like to refer you to an excellent article on electricity systems based on 100% renewable energy for India and the SAARC region that was published in July 2017. That article uses optimization methodology to calculate the low-cost pathway to 100% renewables and ends up with a spatially resolved mapping of where the energy should be produced and how the energy storage should be effectuated with which technologies. In terms of which types of power generation to go for, this map illustrates the basic principles. You see in beige, for example, all through the South Asia region, there's a major role for photovoltaics, single axis electricity generation. The blue circles, which you can see, for example, in the northern region, subregions, are the onshore wind opportunities with very high quality wind resources. You also see a number of regions in dark that are hydroelectric, especially in the north, of course, near the Himalayas. What this study shows is that India could have a massive expansion of power generation and accomplish all of its power generation replacing coal with renewables to get 100% renewable grid. The next picture shows the storage of this intermittent solar and wind energy. The red is battery storage systems. The blue is gas storage. That's gas storage in power-to-gas systems where renewable energy is used to produce hydrogen, which is then used in methanation to produce synthetic methane, which, as I described earlier, can then be burned by dispatchable gas-fired power plants and be a very effective part of the overall energy system. What this article and many other articles have emphasized is what I declare in the next slide, the big advantages of a connected system where renewable energy in different regions is connected with HVDC, high voltage direct current transmission grids. The essence of renewable energy is two facts. One is it's often not close to where people live, so it has to be transmitted and distributed, of course. And second, it is intermittent. So where it is sunny in one place, it may be nighttime or cloudy in another. Where it's windy in one place, it may be sunny or not windy in another. Because of this imperfect correlation or even anti-correlation of this intermittent energy, connecting various regions of the world essentially smooths the energy availability and reduces the costs of storage. So by having a larger grid connection, it's possible to have less investment in expensive storage technologies. There's even a concept which I find very admirable and exciting called GEI, Global Energy Interconnection, that is being promoted by China and especially by an organization called GuideCo, the Global Energy Interconnection Development Cooperation Organization. GuideCo has modeled a worldwide interconnectivity shown on this map, which connects high-quality renewable energy all over the world. And this would lead to a resilient energy system at low cost. Of course, it requires a tremendous trust globally and a tremendous amount of geopolitical cooperation. But it's precisely that cooperation which will get us to where we need to go: a safe climate, clean air, and low-cost, plentiful energy. So let me conclude with the basic observation. It is time for China, India, the United States, Russia, the Gulf states where I am right now speaking from Dubai, and others to present bold 100% decarbonization by 2050 action plans at the United States this September. I'd like all the experts to tell the politicians this can be done. We have ample renewable energy. We have smart technologies, battery electric vehicles, gas to liquids, power to gas, power to hydrogen, power to liquids, ways to store intermittent energy, high voltage direct current, electricity for heating, electricity for sectors like steel, solutions such as synthetic hydrocarbons for aviation, solutions for shipping such as fuel cells using hydrogen or direct combustion of hydrogen in large ocean-going vessels. In other words, with top engineering and high quality diplomacy and cooperation, we really have the capacity to solve multiple problems. Access to quality energy for all, 100% zero carbon energy, a safe climate, and clean air. It's extremely exciting. It's extremely important. It's extremely vital that these ideas be known by the political leaders and be adopted, and frankly, that we push back against the vested interests, the coal industry, the oil and gas industry, which tell us it can't be done, or that it shouldn't be done, or that it doesn't have to be done. This is not true. We need to move to 100% clean energy. We need to move fast. Our health, our safety, the world for our children depends on it. This is why the World Sustainable Development Summit was launched and why it is such a wonderful and important meeting. Thank you for letting me be part of it. I wish I could be with you in person, but I am completely with you in spirit. All best wishes for the conference, and I look forward to seeing many, many of you in person very soon. Thank you so much.
Tremendous stuff, real fighting talk. I like to think that one of the few of the other people in the lounge there overheard some of that, and maybe it seeped in as well. Dr. Srivastava, do you want to say a few words in response?
Let me just give a few points sitting here itself. I think Professor Sachs very rightly enjoined upon all of us to think big, out of the box, and be extremely ambitious, because that is what the need of the hour is. The key issue that he's pointed out, or a number of solutions that he pointed out to, were solutions that have to be from the supply side. But I do want to focus your attention also on the demand side, which I think is critically important. And while we look at the big things, once again, going to emphasize the need for looking at the small things. He started his presentation by talking about the air pollution problems in India. And I think there are many people in this room who live in Delhi, and we are sorely aware of the fact that every October, November, December, we are facing completely unacceptable levels of air pollution. And there are various response measures which the government, again, calls upon us to be able to implement. But I think the interesting question to ask is that how many of us actually respond to these calls that are put out? You know, don't burn biomass, don't run your diesel gensets, don't use vehicles when it is not needed to be used, etc. I mean, of course, we had the odd even scheme and so on and so forth. Why is it so difficult for us to be able to become part of that movement that is required? So governments can do and provide one part of the solution, but the other part of the solution has to come from the normal citizenry, each and every one of us. And we normally find that that is extremely difficult for us to be able to implement. Staying with the issue of air pollution for a little while longer, just a couple of seconds. We had the Auto Fuel Vision policy document that had come out. Some of you must be aware of it. There was a lot of discussion in those committee meetings on whether we could leapfrog from Euro 4 to Euro 6, which is something that we are trying to do now. But you know, while we were focusing our attention enormously on looking at improvements in the refining sector, it turned out that one of the biggest barriers was going to be the automobile manufacturing sector, that was finding it extremely difficult to be able to move or do that same kind of leapfrogging and match their vehicles to the fuels that was going to be available to them. And today, while we are looking at leapfrogging not just to better fuels but to electric vehicles by the year 2030, there's some talk of it. We do go back and forth. But when you go to the gas stations to fill up petrol in your car and ask for the premium fuels, more often than not in the last few weeks and months, these premium fuels have not been available to you. And while you have the vehicles that are equipped with the best technologies, and you know that if you don't use the premium fuel, your catalyst is going to go for a 6, etc., what do you do? So the question that I'm raising over here is that each and every one of us who are aware of the problem need to be able to carry our conviction beyond the room in which we are sitting and discussing it. Not to say that I'm doing it, even I'm guilty of the same. But we have to be able to carry this conviction beyond the conference rooms and events out into the real life and actually demand the change that is required at all levels. And I think we are not doing enough of that. On the adaptation side, which we didn't really get a chance to discuss today, again, I think there are a number of solutions that are just waiting to be implemented. But at the same time, I think there needs to be a recognition that one-size-fits-all solutions, particularly on the adaptation side, are not going to work because the contexts in India are so very diverse. So the question that comes up is, are we empowering local governments, local communities enough so that they are able to design their own solutions, knowing that their vulnerabilities may be somewhat different to the vulnerabilities of the village next to them? So I think there are a number of questions for us to discuss and deliberate upon when we talk about India and the climate crisis. And we have just started talking possibly at the very macro level and on the supply side, but all along the value chain, there are a number of solutions, a number of mechanisms that need to be put in place, and I think it's time to just get down to doing it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Srivastava. Now we have another report launch, the last of our report launches of this summit. It's a launch of a report called Rural Electrification, the Impact on Distribution Companies of India. And just to give a little background, TERI has collaborated with the Shakti Sustainable Energy Foundation to set up a distribution utilities forum to promote dialogue among the DISCOMs, the electricity distribution companies, and look at how best. Yeah, we've got people coming up to launch it. I think we had a slightly premature distribution there. Look at how best to achieve household electrification goals in a genuinely inclusive and sustainable manner. So this is Mr. Krishan Dhawan, CEO of the Shakti Sustainable Energy Foundation. I'm sorry. Excellent. So we're well represented. Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. We're about to move to the final words of Mr. Desai and Dr. Mathur. You'll be pleased to hear this is about the last time you'll hear from me. So I'd just like to cheekily take a moment to say thank you very much for having me. I've learned a huge amount. I've hugely enjoyed it. Apart from the time when I forgot to invite one of the speakers to speak, then I wanted a big hole to open up in the stage and swallow me completely. Otherwise, it's been an absolute honor. So thank you very much. And now I'd like to invite Mr. Desai to say a few words, sir.
Thank you very much. Well, friends, we are coming to the end of this process, this World Sustainable Development Summit of 2019. It's been around for a long time now. And we've heard a lot during the course of this summit about the nature of the problems that we face, and what was very inspiring was that so much of the discussion was on the solutions and what needs to be done in order to get those solutions in place. And in some ways, this has been the characteristic of the World Sustainable Development Summit. For me, this is particularly exciting because I have been involved in this process of sustainable development for about 35 years now, starting with the Brundtland Commission. And when we brought in the idea of sustainable development into the Brundtland Commission, It was basically to find a bridge between those people who thought that environment was what is most important and all growth, development, etc. is a threat to the environment. Many of them came from the conservation movement. Many of them came from the very developed countries which had already reached high levels of prosperity. And on the other side were the people from developing countries mostly, but not just them, who felt that this was something which was meant to stop growth and development. And the idea of sustainable development was injected into the work of the Brundtland Commission. I played a certain role in that, as a bridge. And that's what it was meant to be. In many ways, the idea caught on, many things happened, and one of the reasons the ideas did catch on was simultaneously, along with the Brundtland report, there was growing concern about global climate change, starting with the Villa Conference in 1985. But when we did the Rio Conference in 92, I was the Deputy Secretary General of that and the person handling the substantive side there, I would say that the driving force behind sustainable development came mostly from environmental groups and NGOs and the European countries, which had come much closer to some of these boundaries than maybe other people had. It was, there were a few others, of course, involved. Take corporations, for instance. When we did Rio, with some difficulty, we put together a World Business Council for Sustainable Development of, I would say, around 20, 25 CEOs. The one Indian CEO who was present, who was part of that, was Ratan Tata of the Tata Group. Go fast forward. By the time we did the Johannesburg conference, the extent of corporate interest and involvement was so great that we had to have a parallel conference with several hundred corporate leaders present. We also saw certain other changes taking place. Take the world of science. There was much greater sense of commonality of views amongst scientists by then. People tend to forget that when you talk of climate change, the idea that human beings are responsible for climate change, of anthropogenic influence on climate, was not fully recognized by the IPCC till the third assessment report, which came at the beginning of this century. When we did the Rio conference, there was climate skepticism. There was skepticism from development people who thought this was all a conspiracy to stop growth and so on. That had changed significantly by the time we got to Johannesburg. And since then, something else has also changed, which is that countries which had stayed on the sidelines in the early days of the discussions on sustainable development, countries like China, to a certain extent India, but not that much, India was a little more fully engaged, became much more a part of this process. The change that I see between then and now is that at that time, sustainable development was the agenda of environmentalists who were highly skeptical about all forms of growth and development. Today, I believe sustainable development has become the agenda of people who are looking at the future of growth and development. Corporations, governments in the developing world, like China and India, for instance. Part of the reason for this is, of course, what happened in the global process. It created a sense of fear, if you like, in people's minds, saying this is going to come, so let us be ready and prepared for it. But I think this change in the attitude to sustainable development of seeing it as an opportunity is, I think, one of the big transformations that I see that has taken place. And it's for this reason that I really want to suggest to you, particularly the young people here, we are winning. We are winning. We are winning. Why? First, you look at the ranks of climate skeptics. I know of no case of somebody who thought that climate change was a serious problem caused by humans, forgetting that and becoming a climate skeptic. I know of many instances of people who are climate skeptics who now believe that this is one of the most important challenges that we face. I no longer hear the argument which I heard 20, 25 years ago, that environment is a luxury which poor people, poor countries cannot afford. I increasingly hear the argument that poverty cannot be resolved unless you also resolve environmental problems. That is one reason why we are winning. More and more people are with us in the ideas that underlie sustainable development. We are winning because the people who are going to be shaping the future of our growth, the investors, the corporations, and so on, are increasingly buying into this agenda, perhaps partly as a defensive measure because they think that this is going to come through policy, but partly also, I think, as a measure of opportunity. Look, for instance, at the people we have there listed as sponsors. Besides governments and international organizations, we have new economy companies like Uber. We have companies like NTPC, a old economy company, which is trying to do things differently. We, of course, have major global environmental NGO groups which are involved. This is part of the change that I see, that there are many more people who are concerned and integrated into this agenda than before. Most important, countries like India and China see this as an opportunity for leapfrogging. China sees the new energy economy clearly as an opportunity for leapfrogging over the shoulders of the West. And this is important because, in my view, the great changes in growth and development do not come from government. Governments are always very slow to react. They come from what Schumpeter called creative destruction. The move from the coal energy economy of the 19th century to the electricity oil economy of the 20th century did not take place because of government policy. It took place because of the type of creative destruction policies which Schumpeter talked about. And if in our century we are going to move from this to a decarbonized energy economy, it will also come from that process of creative destruction. And that process has to rest in the processes of investment and the market economy, and that has started happening. So the second reason why we are winning is because the basic processes of economic investment and growth are being increasingly influenced by these ideas of sustainable development, now even in the world of finance, as we heard. Go and try and raise money for a coal-based power plant now in the international capital market. You will fail altogether. We are winning because of the new it's being shaped increasingly, the agenda is being shaped increasingly by the countries where the action is, China, India, Asian countries, etc. But most important of all, we are winning because the young people are with us. Go anywhere and meet young people, and they are with you. So for all of these reasons, I'm an old man, I will not see the end, but many of you will, 2030, 2050, many of you will be around in 2050. I believe we are winning. The only thing is we are not winning fast enough. We are getting there, but we're not getting there fast enough. That is the challenge that we really face. Somebody spoke earlier about the 1.5 degree report, which says you have but 10 years to stay within this. I don't think we can. We are probably going to go beyond. And we will almost certainly have to start talking more seriously about adaptation than we have done so far. We may have to start talking more seriously about carbon capture and storage than we have done so far, but those are all in the future. So we're winning, but we're not winning fast enough. And that is why we continue to need processes which bring people together, which reinforce people's resolve, which in some sense, where you can give each other enthusiasm and heart to pursue this agenda. That is the role of meetings like this, which brings together people from governments, people from civil society, people from industry, people from international organizations, people from global NGOs, and most of all, a lot of young people to participate in this exercise. And I hope what they take away from this, particularly these discussions of the solutions that came of place before them, that this is a battle we can win. Only thing is we must win it much faster than we've been doing it so far. So on behalf of, as the chairman of TERI, on behalf of everybody in TERI, Ajay, Mathur, and the 1,100 people who work in TERI, I thank you for being here, and I look forward to seeing you again at next year's summit. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Desai. Dr. Mathur.
There is very little for me to add after Mr. Desai's speech. Following the history, the fact that meetings held periodically, regularly, bringing together a range of stakeholders, serve as a signal, a beacon for action to occur. People have pointed out that when we started in the climate discussions with the Kyoto Protocol, it was expected that the emissions in 2030 would be about 60 billion tons of carbon dioxide. Today, with the various things that countries have announced they will do for the Paris agreements, the NDCs, we see that it is already down to 42. And we need to get it down to 30. We are still far away. Nobody will ever say the Kyoto Protocol was a success. Paris has yet to start, but we have still been able to move the needle. And that needle has moved because of the constant refrain that we need to have a future that is different from the past. I think everybody here agrees with that. We have shared our learnings. The number of releases of reports and books, I think, set a new standard, as did the second part of any meeting of this sort, getting people together. The number of partnership agreements that was signed was phenomenal. All of this indicates that we are pushing the limits. This has happened because you are here. Because so many of you are here this year who were also here last year. We are also very glad that there is a large number of people here who were not here last year. We hope that you're here next year together with your friends who have not been here earlier. Adding to the number of people who come is very, very important. Obviously, this has happened because of a huge amount of support that we have had. You see the sponsors on the board. I want to thank them for their generous support and hope that this support would ensure that we are able to do this again and again and again and keep moving the needle forward. I also want to thank my colleagues at TERI. It has been possible only because of the thinking, of the actions, of the coordination and bringing people together that they start doing. In fact, Annapurna, who manages this, I hope that you're already thinking of the next year. And I want to thank her and the entire secretariat of the WSDS. All of you who are here, could you please rise? People from the TERI press, people from the secretariat, people from outreach, people from logistics. These are the people who make it happen. And I want to tell them that what they have done has helped us all move forward. As Mr. Desai said, these are the kinds of events which ensure that the younger crowd particularly is in tune with what tomorrow's needs are. I think it was Tom Kuhn who said that paradigm changes occur because the older people die. As Mr. Desai said, we won't be here in 2050. I won't be here. But what I'm reasonably sure is that the number of people every year who come here, who will be here in 2050, keeps increasing and increasing exponentially. I again thank you all for being here and look forward to welcoming you here next year. Thank you. And Martin, many, many thanks.
Many thanks, sir. A pleasure.
him quickly stage. ठीक है, ठीक है. Come closer. Her job is not done.